Good morning and welcome to the Public Service Commission of South Carolina. It is Friday, September 1st at 9:36 a.m. and we are here this morning for a presentation by the South Carolina Office of Regulatory Staff related to a report and examination that the Office of Regulatory Staff has conducted regarding December 2022 winter storm Elliott and outages and blackouts in the service territories of Duke Energy Carolinas LLC and Duke Energy Progress LLC. Who's here for the Office of Regulatory Staff?
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the Commission. I'm Ben Muschin with ORS.
And we have representatives from Duke Energy with us today.
Yes, good morning, Chair Belzer. Kamal Robinson and Katie Brown on behalf of Duke Energy Carolinas and Duke Energy Progress, as well as outside counsel Frank Ellerby here at Robinson Gray. Chair Belzer, if I can, at some point after introductions, I'd like to just make a quick statement before the presentation begins. Thank you.
I think we're getting ready to start with the presentation, and you can go ahead, Mr. Robinson. Thank you.
Sure thing. So, Chair Belzer, members of the Commission, again, good morning. What I wanted to just share with the Commission is we have a number of subject matter experts here from the company. We're here available and ready to answer any questions the Commission may have based off of the ORS's presentation. In addition to that, we would like the opportunity after the discussion to just discuss amongst ourselves and to reserve the ability to be able to provide the additional context based on the ORS's report from the company's perspective. If it pleases the Commission, I understand from conversation with the ORS Council that they would not be opposed to that request if it needed to be made. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. My understanding was that this presentation was sort of in lieu of an allowable ex parte presentation. It was really just going to be a high-level overview of the report. Is that a misunderstanding on my part?
Not at all, Chair Belzer. It was just from the framework of based off of the presentation and discussion. If there's any additional context that the company felt that the Commission should hear, wanted to have the ability to be able to do that as needed.
Thank you. I mean, we're not making any decisions based on this presentation today. I can assure you of that. So
we fully understand that, Chair Belzer.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Muschin?
Madam Chair, just one housekeeping item. As you mentioned, when ORS filed the report on August 25th, I believe last Friday, we filed a redacted and a confidential version. I believe we have copies available of both of those reports if the commissioners need them. But the presentation that we have prepared and what we're giving today does not contain any confidential information. To the extent that the commissioners have questions about the matters that have been redacted, we would just ask that be mindful that we would need to go into a closed session. I don't think our folks will need to do that, but if the commission does have questions, we would need to take those steps.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Muschin. And I think some of us have the report already, but if you have copies, you can leave them. That'll keep us from having to print extras.
Happy to.
Thank you. And I neglected to do a roll call of commissioners, so let me do that at this time. Present in the hearing room, we have Commissioner Justin Williams, Vice Chair Powers, Commissioner Carolee Williams, and Chair Belzer. With us virtually, we have Commissioner Urban and Commissioner Caston, and with us telephonically, we have Commissioner Thomas. And with that, I'll recognize the Office of Regulatory Staff to proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So with us today for the presentation, we have Ms. Dawn Hipp, who is our Chief Operating Officer, and in addition, we have Matt King, who is our outside consultant with GDS, and I will turn it over to them.
Ms. Hipp?
Good morning, and thank you for allowing us the opportunity to present the results of our inspection and examination. As you're aware, the Commission requested ORS to provide a report to the Commission detailing our findings, conclusions, and recommendations. And in summary, the Commission requested that ORS inspect and examine the following items: the causes of the December 2022 outages, communication from the companies with customers, the media, and any and all regulatory bodies, the role of SEAM, any lessons learned, any areas for improvement, and finally, anything else that ORS deemed relevant. We filed our report on August 25th, and you've got a copy of that, and we'll leave behind at the chair's instruction additional copies. As you're aware, we engaged a third-party consultant, GDS Associates Incorporated, to help us with the inspection and examination activities. And as Mr. Mushkin said, today Matt King, Director of Markets and Analytics with GDS, is here to provide a high-level overview of the report. Matt's led the GDS team that have worked on this project, and he has over 10 years of experience working in the utility consulting industry. His work includes regulatory review and development of client testimony, technical modeling analytics, and review of key strategic market issues. Matt has a bachelor's in industrial and systems engineering from the Georgia Institute of Technology and a master's in management science and engineering from Stanford University. Today, Matt will give a brief presentation. We think 15 minutes or so, maybe 20. And at the close of the presentation, both Matt and I will be available to answer any questions that the commissioners might have. So I'll turn it over to you, Matt.
Thank you for that introduction, and my pleasure to be with you all this morning. As Dawn just said, I have a brief set of slides, about 15 slides worth of content here to walk through. They do provide the key findings from the report that was published a week ago today. I have one terminology point I want to go over up front here. As you can see on this title slide, we are discussing Duke Energy Carolinas and Duke Energy Progress. I will abbreviate those to DEC and DEP. That's consistent with what we do throughout the report. We also have information shown both at those levels, at those company levels, and aggregated across those two companies as well. So we're showing information throughout at both levels, and when I'm referring to the collective, I'll just use the term Duke. Oh,
There you go.
okay, this was working before. All right, so just to expand on what Dawn said in terms of our process, after the event happened in December 2022 and the commission released its order at the beginning of this year, we began working with ORS. Shortly thereafter, the first part of our work was to conduct multiple rounds of discovery, requesting and accessing information from Duke. That discovery consisted of over 100 of our own questions, and on top of that, we also had access to information from both the North Carolina and federal jurisdiction reviews as well. I led a cross-functional team of experts from GDS from multiple different departments, including supply planning, generation services, transmission, and distribution. We brought that full range of expertise to cover the relevant set of issues and topic areas related to the event. The culmination of the analysis of that team was the report, which was published on August 25th. I have a few slides just to refresh on the event itself, the background, the context, and what happened. This first slide here shows some information related to the weather during the event in December 2022. And again, I have a couple terminology points I want to bring up here just so we're consistent throughout the rest of the slides. This chart on the left shows Duke system average temperatures from December 23rd to 26th, and what we have highlighted there in red is the load shed directive, which we have defined from 6 to 10 a.m. on December 24th. So we use the term load shed event to refer to specifically that time frame. The figures on the right show weather departures from normal temperatures with darker purple coloring indicating colder temperatures than average for December 23rd to 25th. That 3-day time span is what we refer to in the report, and I'll refer to here today as Winter Storm Elliott. What you can see from those 3 days is that Winter Storm Elliott primarily impacted the middle third of the country on December 23rd, and it moved in an easterly direction, primarily impacting the Carolinas, Duke's territory, and the rest of the eastern seaboard on December 24th. By December 25th, cold temperatures lingered, but the worst of the storm had begun to dissipate.
Could you explain that scale at the bottom of on the right side?
That scale for the figures on the right is a departure from the 30-year normal temperature. So the dark purple color you see is 25 degrees or more colder than what's deemed normal for this time of year.
Thank you.
And I apologize. I'm looking at what's in front of us, and it seems like our labels for what's shown in the chart were lost in translation here. These are figures that you will find in the report itself, but I'll do my best to backfill where you're seeing it say Series 1 and Series 2. That's not correct, but I'll try and do a good job of describing as we're walking through here. First of all, we have several charts that show the morning of December 24th specifically. The x-axis should be labeled as 1 a.m. to 12 p.m., and we're covering the 12-hour midnight to noon period of that morning. So there are several charts that show information related to that time frame. The dark solid line you see here is the load Duke actually served that morning. And you can see that it approached a peak level of approximately 35 gigawatts from 6 to 7 a.m. The dotted line above the solid line reflects where the actual demand would have gone, but for the estimated amounts from load shed and demand side management activity. So, but for any load being shed and demand side management activities being held, the load is estimated it would have reached approximately 36.5 gigawatts later in the morning from 8 to 9 a.m.
Madam Chair, let me just interrupt. I see that this may be a problem for some of the slides. The handouts that you do have the correct labels on them. I would certainly be happy to use it on the Elmo and flip through if that would be more appropriate. I'm not sure. Something must have happened when we transmitted it electronically. Or we can continue on as...
Let's continue, and if there are questions, we may interrupt as we're on a slide, if that's okay.
Certainly.
With Mr. King. Thank you.
So this figure shows that same time period of the morning of December 24th, and what we're seeing here is Duke generation plants encountering outages throughout this morning period. So you can see that at the same time as loads were increasing and peak demand levels were being reached, Duke generation plants encountered issues and failed and tripped offline or were derated partially. So what the different colors indicate here are specific plants and the amount of capacity unavailable associated with that plant around the timing of when it became unavailable, and there's also a brief cause for what the issue was that caused the plant to become unavailable. Each of these outages is described further in the report in a respective section. What we have shown here on a company basis for DEC and DEP individually now is the load shed directive in the relevant time frame from 6 to 10 a.m. So I want to delineate a directive as the amount of load shed Duke operators were requesting, and that is not necessarily the same as how much load shed is being implemented at the exact same instant. So here we're seeing how much load shed Duke operators were requesting as the event progressed. You can see for DEC, directives for load shed began shortly after 6 a.m. and then began decreasing shortly after 9 a.m. For DEP, directives began slightly later, around 6:30 in the morning, and began decreasing earlier at shortly after 8 a.m. I'm now shifting out of the background and context of what happened and into what we have described as the 5 causes of outages in the report. The first cause is load forecasting and supply planning. On this chart, we have shown 10 years of historical winter load levels for Duke Energy. And to specify, since the axis was lost here, we are looking at the December 15th to January 15th timeframe. So we don't have the entire winter shown, but for purposes of highlighting this December event versus some of the extreme weather events that have occurred in the past 10 years, we've got that time frame shown. So Winter Storm Elliott, which is highlighted in red there, did not bring all-time peak load records for Duke, but this was the earliest in the winter season that such extremely high load levels occurred. Historical loads are an important input to load forecasting, so the lack of a similar event hindered Duke's forecasting models. The fact that the event occurred on a holiday and a weekend is yet another challenge to forecasting. A general finding from the GDS team was that the earliness of Winter Storm Elliott in the winter season challenged Duke's preparedness for the event.
Mr. King, just a moment, please. Mr. Mustian, I think we have a request, if you would mind showing the slides on
Certainly,
the Elmo,
happy to do
please.
so.
Let's pause for a second while we get that hook up and running. My apologies, Mr. King.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Thomas?
Thank you. It would be helpful to me if they would state the slide number as they're going through these so I can be sure I'm looking at the same slide everybody else is looking at.
Thank you, Commissioner Thomas. We will certainly ask them to do that, and they're nodding their heads.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair, and apologize for the technical difficulties. So, Commissioner, I think we're on slide 7. We're on slide 8.
Okay, so here on slide 8, we're still on this first cause of load forecasting and supply planning. I just provided some broader historical context. We're now focusing in on the days around the event. In particular, what we've shown here is December 19th, 21st, and 23rd. That refers to the Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, the week prior to the event leading up to that Saturday. For each of DEC and DEP, we are showing their hourly load forecast across the relevant days around the event. And what you can see is that as the event approached, Duke's load forecast consistently under forecast the peak demands that would actually manifest that December 24th morning. Even on Friday, December 23rd, the day beforehand, there was significant under forecast peak load. It's also worth pointing out here that for DEC, load levels later on December 23rd, that evening and night, were also significantly under forecast.
Commissioner Irvin?
Are we allowed to ask questions as we go through, or going to do that later?
Just a moment. I think if it's clarification of a slide, maybe, but if there are more detailed questions, if we could hold those. Is that correct, Ms. Hill?
I'll wait till later. Thank you.
That's correct, yep. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Okay, we're moving to slide 9 now. Still on the first cause of load forecasting and supply planning, what we're showing now is going beyond just load levels, and we're showing forecasted operating reserves. Again, we're looking at the same December 19th, 21st, 23rd as the Monday, Wednesday, Friday leading up to the event and what actually occurred in the plan on December 24th. Operating reserves represent supply that is available to be called upon to respond to unforeseen circumstances. So the data represented here combines both the amount of generation supply Duke was planning to have available and the peak demand for each of these days that supply would be needed to meet that load. DEC and DEP each have a defined reserve target level that you'll see represented by the dotted line. So Duke's supply planning did show significant deterioration in available operating reserves as early as the plan that was conducted on that Wednesday, December 23rd. Duke did take some steps to schedule additional supply to help restore available operating reserves, but ultimately those actions were inadequate. Now on slide 10, we're shifting to the next cause number 2, generation outages and failures. Duke had a large amount of generation unavailable prior to Winter Storm Elliott going into the event. There was already a significant amount of generation that was not available for a few different reasons. There's 3 different categories of reasons represented here, and I'll walk through each of them briefly. The first you see depicted on top in the yellowish color is forced outages that occurred before the event. So these are failure events at various Duke generation assets that occurred earlier in the winter or even earlier in the fall, and those plants had not yet been restored to service, so that generation remained unavailable throughout the event. The next category is planned outages, which is included in the bottom bars in the bluish teal color. Those include outages that Duke does schedule. The largest was 759 megawatts related to the Robinson Nuclear Station. That planned outage was originally scheduled to end by December, but it was ultimately extended, and that plan was unavailable throughout the event. The other category that is included in that bluish color down on the bottom is extended plan reserves, or what's abbreviated as EPR. That is what the term sounds like. That is generation assets that can be used and put into an operational status, but they're in an extended reserve position. They have a long lead time, and Duke has procedures for bringing those plants out of that status and into operations. Ultimately, the Allen plant, which is 426 megawatts across 2 units, was in EPR and remained in EPR and was not recalled throughout the event, so that capacity was unavailable. Shifting now to slide 11. Still on the same cause of generation unavailability, but we are now looking specifically at unavailability incremental to what I just discussed that occurred throughout the event. So these are incremental outages that occurred between December 23rd and 26th depicted here. We have those shown by cause. In terms of technology, they're primarily natural gas and coal units, but what we're showing is the cause. Instead, you can see predominantly on the morning of December 24th, it was freezing or weather-related issues that caused those plants to trip offline, and that was the primary reason for generation unavailability as it manifested throughout the event. As you can also see with the inclusion of December 26th, the Monday following the event, that these incremental outages were resolved fairly quickly, and that generation was back in service by Monday, December 26th. Shifting now to slide 12, we're moving to the third cause, which is curtailed purchases. I mentioned earlier that Duke did take actions to attempt to provide for additional supply leading up to the event. One of those actions was that on a day-ahead basis, Duke arranged to purchase power from counterparties in PJM and import that power on the morning of December 24th. For December 24th specifically, Duke bought predominantly firm power, but even those purchases were ultimately curtailed, especially around the highest load levels that Duke and PJM experienced this morning. So you can see that as the traditional peak period of 7 to 8 a.m. and around that time frame when load levels are typically highest, that's when the greatest degree of curtailment was happening. The reason for these curtailments was not transmission congestion. Rather, PJM was experiencing its own issues and supply-demand balance concerns related to Winter Storm Elliott, and it was well within its own emergency operating procedures at this time. If PJM gets far enough into those emergency operating procedures, one of the steps it will take is to recall or curtail non-firm purchases first, but ultimately it will also curtail firm purchases, firm exports when conditions get extreme enough. Ultimately, because of the large-scale nature of Winter Storm Elliott, Duke was not able to rely on its neighbors for emergency support. Moving to slide 13, jumping to cause number 4, which we have termed as network customers. I do want to point out that these are all the other figures are sourced directly from the report. These two are not. They're shown here just for discussion purposes in context. The figure on the left you'll see there is from the Energy Information Administration, and what it shows is the balancing authority areas within the Carolinas. You can see that Duke actually consists of 3 different balancing authority areas, and they are shown in blue. The point from this chart is to understand that while Duke is the balancing authority for its respective areas, there are other utilities embedded within Duke's balancing authority. Those utilities, those embedded utilities, buy network transmission service from Duke under the terms and conditions of its open access transmission tariff, so we refer to them as network customers. Certain of those network customers were experiencing their own supply issues related to independent power producers they contract with. As the event was progressing and those independent power producers went offline and created supply issues for the network customers, Duke was in communications with those network customers and their agents to attempt to get them to schedule replacement supply. Ultimately, no replacement supply was available, and Duke reported that curtailment of that network customer load would not have been feasible in the necessary time frame. So as the balancing authority and transmission service provider, Duke provided operating reserve supply under the terms of its open access transmission tariff, which ultimately exacerbated its supply shortfall situation during the event. Moving now to slide 14. The first 4 causes are unique and different to this 5th cause, in that the first 4 causes are related to the resource inadequacy that ultimately was the cause that led to customer outages being initiated. This 5th cause led to those outages being extended and lengthened beyond what they otherwise would have needed to be. In order to effectuate load shed, Duke utilizes a third-party software tool that automates load shed and restoration. The tool is designed to rotate outages on circuits every 15 to 30 minutes, bringing those offline, shedding the load, and then restoring the load at those circuits and rotating the outage to another circuit. That tool ultimately failed during the event and stopped functioning, which required Duke to revert to manual load shed and restoration processes. Those manual processes ultimately extended and lengthened customer outages beyond the 15 to 30 minute time frame that the automated tool would have utilized, and also beyond the 6 to 10 a.m. approximate load shed period when Duke had inadequate resources. This chart shows the number of customers on outage across North and South Carolina on December 24th. Looking at all of Duke's customers in both states provides the extent to which outages were lengthened beyond the 10 a.m. period. And the next chart on slide 15 provides for the same data, but unique to South Carolina's customers specifically. So here's the same information, but shown specifically just for South Carolina customers. For South Carolina customers, manual load shed and restoration resulted in outages that averaged in their totality 3 hours for customers and a maximum of up to 10 hours in duration. In South Carolina, just under 95,000 customers were impacted by outages. Those are the 5 causes. Another aspect of our report, we discuss areas for improvement. Duke self-identified corrective actions that it has or is pursuing, and those are described in the report and in an appendix to the report. We're out here on slide 16, by the way. First slide on areas for improvement. GDS and ORS attempted to identify areas for improvement that were incremental to what Duke had already self-identified, and those are shown on the following two slides. These 3 categories you see here are directly related to the previously discussed causes. The first category for load forecasting and supply planning, we recommend improving load forecasting models and ensuring forecasts and supply plans can be updated intraday during and around extreme events. For generation, we recommend improvements to outage scheduling, EPR or extended plan reserve procedures, making changes to staffing and testing to avoid startup failures at remote facilities, and generally improving plant winterization and overall winter preparedness processes. Additionally, although fuel availability was not a cause of outages, we recommend a winter fuel assurance based specifically on the Winter Storm Elliott experience because of the natural gas supply availability issues and pressure issues that occurred adjacent to the load shed event. For load shed implementation, we recommend enhancing software testing procedures and tracking of software independencies. Moving now to slide 17. We have our other 3 categories of areas for improvement. The first one shown here, active load reduction programs, is not a cause of outages described in the report, but there is a section of the report described to other key areas that we thought were important, although they were not directly related to causes. Active load reduction is one of these. In this area, we recommend making improvements to program utilization during extreme events with a focus on those events potentially overlapping holidays and weekends, and also reflecting the true expected capability of those programs in short-term planning. For network and wholesale customer interaction, we recommend reviewing and improving communication and coordination procedures so that supply replacement or load reduction can be completed as quickly as possible. And finally, in terms of customer communications with customers, the media and regulatories is discussed in its own section in the report. In this area, we recommend making improvements to the timeliness and clarity in customer outage communications. And that is my final content slide. Slide 18 is just a closing slide. So at that point, that is all the prepared material I had to present.
Thank you, Mr. King. Commissioner Irvin, you had a question?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. I'd like to go back through the list briefly and follow up with some questions. First of all, the load forecast apparently was deficient in recognizing that the storm was going to impact South Carolina service area for Duke. And I'm wondering more specifically how that occurred, because what we heard earlier was that there was an extended forecast, a 7-day forecast that predicted and projected that the storm would impact the Carolinas on Christmas Eve of last year. And why was that not kind of an alert warning that would have given them ample opportunity to correct the load forecast?
Commissioner, thanks for the question. We do describe some of the timing more specifically in the report. We discussed things like the timing of when the first extreme weather alert Duke's meteorology provided to their departments, and certainly those happened several days or weeks in advance of the actual report. I would say, as you can see in this slide 8 that we had shown, that there was some indication of cold weather and higher loads manifesting on December 24th, but the nature of forecasting and uncertainty with weather is you gain more information as you get closer to the actual prompt day. Weather forecasts become more accurate and more certain. So what I see in these load forecasts as they're being incrementally updated is that Duke is receiving information about the extremity of the event, both in terms of how cold temperatures would actually get, and you're also getting additional certainty about when would the coldest temperatures actually arrive. You're learning more and more and gaining more certainty as you get closer to the actual day in question. So that's all pertinent and germane to attempting to forecast the event. The other piece of information I discussed previously in going over this slide is that this was, in terms of the 10-year context for the event that's on slide 7, you could see that this was really the earliest that Duke has experienced such load levels in a significant 10-year window in the winter. So this event, in terms of bringing these very high load levels this early in the winter, was unprecedented. Forecasting traditionally will take historical data and look for patterns and try to provide for a reasonable, accurate forecast based off what's happened in the recent past. So it's always easiest to forecast something that's happened many times before, and the uniqueness of this event in terms of how early it was in the winter and also happening on a holiday weekend is a challenge to load forecast. Duke was not alone in struggling to accurately forecast the peak load levels that occurred.
And that leads to my next question about the holiday weekend. Was there any indication based on your review and investigation that there was a lack of appropriate staffing at the Duke generation facilities and control rooms to manage this storm?
Commissioner, I'd say we had the general finding I mentioned was that the earliness of this event in the winter was a challenge to preparedness, and perhaps Duke would have been better prepared if the event had occurred later in the winter. We do have some areas for improvement where we recommend proactive staffing at remote combustion turbine sites. Those facilities are not traditionally staffed because they're designed to be operated remotely, but to the extent there's an issue and you have staffing that can expedite bringing those units back into service if there is an issue. So we do have an area improvement related to that. Yes, this was around a holiday, so I wouldn't say we have any specific findings that there was staffing issues or that there was a failure to have the right people available when they were needed. But we did have the general finding that, and perhaps the holiday aspect of the event was part of this, but because of how early in the winter it happened, Duke's preparedness was generally challenged.
My next questions go to the generation outages or failures that you discussed, and I'm curious why we've always been told that the nuclear plants or planned outages in the shoulder months, either in the spring months or the fall months. And so why would they deviate from that traditional best practice and have a planned outage for 759 megawatt nuclear plant, when that baseline generation was obviously needed and missing during this event. What and have they taken appropriate steps to correct the mistakes that were made concerning planned outages and forced outages?
Commissioner, I do believe that Duke self-identified some corrective actions related to outage scheduling, and we have those categorized accordingly in the report in the respective section. We also had an area for improvement of improving outage scheduling to ensure that planned outages would not overlap the winter season, including December. As I mentioned, for the Robinson Nuclear Station in particular, the original plan was not for that outage to occur in December, but it was extended into December based off findings throughout the outage that was ongoing in November and earlier in the fall. So our area for improvement is addressed to working on planned outage scheduling such that even if outages are extended, they can be avoid overlapping with the winter period, including December.
My next question goes to the curtail purchases and the network customers being unable to provide Duke with backup power. Isn't that reasonably foreseeable when you have a winter storm forecast that and it's, it's as serious as this storm was? Isn't that easy to plan for? Because you have to assume that not only Duke's network, but all surrounding networks are going to be similarly affected. So I'm just curious if you'd speak to that. How are they going to address that going forward?
Commissioner, I think there's some operational realities to working with your network customers and having them be able to respond as quickly as possible, and that's where our area for improvement is oriented at, being able to work with those folks to schedule replacement supply or arrange for curtailment if none is available in these extreme type events. That's what our area for improvement in this area is oriented at. In terms of what actually happened during the event, you had network customers who were contracted with independent power producers for supply, and those independent power producer owned plants unexpectedly failed, and some of them failed for a very short duration amount of time. And it's that kind of unexpected failure early in the morning during the event and the short duration nature of those failures that challenge operationally being able to coordinate with those network customers. There are procedures and policies in place around coordinating with your network customers, but that was some of what specifically challenged Duke during the event.
My final questions go to the resource outages in terms of the load shed implementation. You told us earlier that the shed implementation tool failed during the event, and I'm wondering what remedial actions or recommendations have been made to either replace the shed tool that failed or to have a backup tool that could assist Duke in better managing a future event. Could you speak to that?
Commissioner, Duke identified numerous corrective actions, self-identified numerous corrective actions related to the tool and worked very quickly to address those issues. I think, the reality of this event occurring early in the winter in December means that the rest of the winter peak load period was still in front of Duke, and they needed to very quickly address those issues with the tool just in case there was another event and it needed to be utilized. So that was an area where they identified there were obvious failures, obvious things that needed to be addressed, and they moved quickly there to get those things addressed as they proceeded through the rest of last winter. We do have a couple areas for improvement related to this topic in terms of testing of software and tracking independencies, and those are driven by our findings of what contributed specifically to the tool failing during the event.
Has the tool been replaced, or has it been repaired, or is it what specifically is going to happen with the one that failed?
Commissioner, I think it's fair to characterize that the appropriate software remedial actions have been taken. Duke always has manual processes to fall back on, but the tool is designed to function, and that there were specific software interdependencies that contributed to issues. So in terms of, I believe the correct patches and updates have been made, and Duke has also improved its testing procedures so that as software is continually changes and updated in the future, that if there are any issues, those can be identified ahead of an event.
And are you aware of any artificial intelligence tools that are now available to utilities to assist them in forecasting that might be incorporated in their future plans?
Commissioner, I think load forecasting processes are continuously being updated and improved. Duke had some self-identified corrective action areas to review its load forecasting models and attempt to improve it. So there's always efforts being made to improve, your forecasting and get a more accurate forecast. More and more data is becoming available, and there are new machine learning and AI techniques that are being applied to try and come up with more accurate forecasting. So there are vendors and folks who do that kind of work specifically that large utilities like Duke will contract with. So I believe those things are being generally pursued in the industry, and Duke is also looking at them.
Did your findings and recommendations include an update to the South Carolina Public Service Commission once these improvements and suggested changes have been completed, to give us kind of an update, kind of advising what steps have been taken?
Good morning, Commissioner. This is Dawn. Certainly, our report is, the recommendations are directed at the company. And so if the commission would like an update based on that, I'm certain that the company would provide that.
I would like to recommend that you follow up and just to ensure that the recommendations in the report have been followed and implemented. And I'll let you decide when the appropriate time to do that is. I understand that it may take some time to implement all the recommendations, but that would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Is that all, Commissioner?
Those were my questions. Thank you, Madam
Thank you.
Chair.
Commissioner Justin Williams?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ms. Hip. And sir, I forgot your name. What is your name again?
Matt King.
Mr. King. Great inspection and examination. Thoroughly enjoyed reading it, and I understand it. What I'm struggling with, though, even after reading it, is not what happened or how it happened, but more so, should this have happened? Now, it's easy to play Monday morning quarterback. It is so easy to do. But when you do that, sometimes you can watch game film and say, you know what, we all make mistakes, we all can get better, but that play just should not have happened. That tackle should not have been missed, that block should not have been missed, so forth and so on. So as you go through your list of suggestions for improvements and you identify the failures on multiple layers, not just Duke, considering all that information, if you were to put yourself in the position of the average ratepayer, who wants heat and and whatever other amenities during the Christmas holiday, and they're not getting that. Would you tell them this happened due to a string of uncontrollable, unforeseeable, unfortunate events, or it happened because of clearly easily identifiable occurrences that for whatever reason just were not addressed appropriately, and so now your heat doesn't work?
Commissioner Williams, I'm also excited for football season to get started back up, so I appreciate the analogy. Yeah, I'll say from our perspective, it's really a combination of a confluence of events that all work together to contribute to the resource inadequacy that manifested on Duke's system that morning. There are, I'll say up front that our report does not make any findings of what should have happened, but we did review the causes of why there were outages. And I think if you characterize those causes, it's a combination of both things that are outside of Duke's control and unprecedented. In the past, for example, Duke has been able to rely on its neighbors for emergency support, and Duke has supported some of its neighbors in emergency situations. So that was a unique and unfortunate aspect of this event. I also mentioned it happened very early in the winter, and if it happened to have occurred later in January, perhaps there would have been a better outcome. There are also decisions that Duke made that directly contributed to outages as well. So without taking a perspective on whether Duke should or should not have made those outages, I think that is a reality of our report. We mentioned that, for example, the Allen plant was not brought out of EPR, and from a Monday quarterbacking perspective, you could say, well, certainly that would have been nice to have, and if a different decision had been made, that would have helped. So that's clearly a decision that's within Duke's control, and I think that's my perspective on that.
Thank you, sir. Okay, I have a question for Ms. Hipp. Ms. Hipp, you are a seasoned veteran appearing before the PSC and working for the ORS. Is there ever going to be an analysis on what should have happened in terms of the outages? Because I understand, this report entitled Inspection and Examination couldn't be a better description of what it is. It left me hanging a little bit, and maybe I was looking for too much from the report, in that I just really want to know, was this avoidable?
I think to the examination of what should have happened is something that both the report leads to, what actions need to be taken to mitigate or prevent this. A load shed event is something, unfortunately, that may have to happen to preserve the network and the grid at certain points in time. It is a tool in the toolbox, not the one that you want to reach for, but the very last tool that the utility will, in some cases, need to use. And so the should is a management decision by the utility. As Mr. King has pointed out, there were several management decisions that we pointed out in the report where the company could have made a different management decision. We've encouraged them to look at that and make improvements, and to Commissioner Irvin's point, we will be following up on those, much like we did the resiliency report that Governor McMaster requested that the agency perform. And so in that case, you will find the improvements to be coming. It is true that it is a combination. It's a combination of things outside of the utility's control, and there are things that were within the utility's control. Would the two of them offset to zero outages? It's unknown to us. If the two, both those outside and those within, when you net them together, would we have eliminated all outages on Christmas Eve? I can't say that with certainty.
Thank you for that. You understand from the average ratepayer perspective, though, the concern. So in this room, with all the experts and the folks that have a certain level of familiarity with the generation of power, I accept without much frustration or consternation that load shedding events may happen. That doesn't bother me. I understand it. I understand why. But the average ratepayer may not. And I will say, my power did not go out between December 23rd and 25th. Had a great holiday time. If it did, my wife would have been on my head saying, "Hey, don't you work for the PSC? Well, what's going on? Maybe we need to move." So if a ratepayer wanted to ensure that they were receiving a level of service where they don't have to worry about something like this, what type of reassurances could be provided to them where they don't have to worry, understanding that it may happen, but that the likelihood of it happening is slim to none because of this exercise and ensuring that they have power when they need it most?
I guess my response to that would be perfection, always on service is a very expensive proposition. So that being said, that guaranteed always on 100% service is something that is not affordable to customers. The goal in utility service provision is if the outages occur, that they are infrequent and that they're of short duration. And so that is the goal that utilities are attempting to achieve. And we see statewide our utilities have very short duration outage and very infrequent outages based on their SAIDI and SAIFI scores that are filed with the commission. In instances where the outage duration is of a long term, such as what you have seen on some of the averages during Christmas Eve, it is to take steps now to improve that, such that an outage occur, that it be of a shorter duration. So I think, customer expectations, we rely on the utilities to provide the basic service, but we have to acknowledge that we cannot afford 100% always on multiple redundancy type service. And it's a bit of a trade-off, and it's finding that balance, if you will. And so taking the lessons learned here, looking at the balance again and saying, is this is not something that customers can tolerate on a holiday, as you said, with for your personal example, and then also of that long of time without, sufficient notice, if you will. What do we need to do to rebalance there? How much is it going to cost the customers? What steps can the utility take to make sure that they're providing that basic service?
I probably don't have the words at 10 o'clock or 10:30 the Friday before South Carolina kickoff to express my gratitude for that explanation, because I don't know how, but some way we need to talk about that a little bit more. There's definitely a way to provide always on guaranteed service. No one wants to pay for it. That's just the reality. And I can understand there being some confusion and discontentment with that thought because, the bill comes every month, you pay it, and you expect to receive service when you need it, when you want it, and especially when you need it most. So I appreciate you sharing that, and I would be interested in any methods or programs that could be established to sort of educate customers on what it is they're actually receiving when they accept service from a utility. So I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. King. Unfortunately, you went to Stanford, but I'm sure you got a great education. According to Commissioner Caston, I don't know if it's already happened, if you guys come to the ACC, it can get tough once you get on this side of the country playing football. So just want to warn you a little bit,
Georgia Tech's in the ACC, and so that's where my original allegiances are. So.
Okay, all right. Well, yeah, Joe Hamilton was pretty good back then. Yeah. Good luck. Good luck to you. Thank you.
Commissioners, any further questions? Commissioner Carolee Williams.
Thank you. Appreciate this work and your being here. Can you understand me?
Yes.
Okay. I just have a few points of clarification. Mr. King, you said a couple of times that the companies would have been better prepared later in the winter. That's not computing for me. I don't understand what that means. So can you bring me up to speed on that?
Sure, Commissioner. Yeah, happy to try and address that. I think the reality is, one, as I said, this is the earliest these peak load levels had ever occurred in Duke's territory. So they're, in terms of their historical experience, they're always have in the past been ready to tackle these sorts of events, and primarily in January and February. It also happens to be the fact that specific to this event, there were a series of unfortunate unavailability circumstances around a number of their generation plants that were resolved when you get into the January and February timeframe, but they had not been resolved in the December timeframe. And it's really those two primary factors that I'm thinking about behind that statement.
Okay. I understand from the perspective of the Robinson plant as an example of unplanned, took longer than was conceived. And I guess what you're saying on the other side is just from a staffing perspective and an awareness perspective. There's something about kind of being in the winter season that the companies are better able to respond and anticipate responding in the January, February timeframe. Is that what you're saying?
Commissioner, I think I'd just say I'm not making any specific statements on staffing.
Okay.
But what I am trying to say is I think the utility can be best prepared for experiencing events similar to what it's experienced in the past. And Duke has experienced in the past 10 years, there have been extreme cold weather events that have stressed Duke's system and the Eastern Interconnection broadly. Those have not happened in December generally. So I'm making more of a general statement about I would expect better preparedness related to events that are similar to events that have happened in the past.
Okay. I noticed the demand side management as a solution in the areas for improvement. And I have not read the report yet. Was there an estimate of the impact that demand side management could have made on Winter Storm Elliott and the ability to meet load?
Commissioner, we have a section of the report. It's section 4. It's titled "Areas that did not directly contribute to the outages," and there's a few categories in there. Section 4.3 is active load reduction programs. So that's on page 44 of the report. It starts there. We have a brief discussion of how Duke utilized those programs. There is a figure. I did not include it in the slide deck, but there is a figure 4.1 on page 45, where you can see the megawatt load reduction that Duke achieved across its active load reduction programs that morning. So you can see the megawatt contribution. There's also some discussion of where there were certain programs that had underperformance, and certain smaller programs were not utilized on December 24th. And so those aspects are discussed in that section.
Thank you. I appreciate the answers and appreciate the work on this.
Thank you.
Commissioners, anything further? Mr. King, Ms. Hipp, thank you. Mr. Mushton, thank you for the presentation. We certainly appreciate that. And y'all may stand down.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Robinson, is there anything from the company at this point?
Chair Belzer, if the company may it have 10 minutes to just have a quick discussion to determine whether or not there's anything to provide?
Yes, sir. I do note in your letter that I think it was earlier this week, the letter that y'all filed in response, that you indicated that that the companies are willing to provide additional feedback should the commission require it. And I think that I know I've read through the report, but I'm still digesting it and maybe wanting something later. But yes, we'll take a 10-minute break. Let's come back at 10:55.
Yes, thank you, Chair Bezel.
Thank you. Good morning and welcome back to the Public Service Commission as we are here for a presentation in non-docketed item 2023-1-E. Let's take a roll call of commissioners. With us virtually, we have Commissioner Caston and Commissioner Irvin, and telephonically, we have Commissioner Thomas. Present in the hearing room, we have Commissioner Justin Williams, Vice Chair Powers, Commissioner Carolee Williams, and Chair Belzer. Mr. Robinson.
Thank you, Chair Belzer. So, Chair Belzer, unless the commission wishes, the company is not planning to bring forth any subject matter experts. However, we'd just like to make 2 quick points. Chair Belzer, as you mentioned before we left on break, the company did file an update, essentially an explanation and some additional context on August 29th about the ORS report. The company notes that in that letter, that report, the company did provide some updates on where it is in terms of several of its action items that were identified in the ORS report as an exhibit. So the company notes that, and the company will continue to update the ORS and the commission on where we are from an action item perspective. In addition to that, as you indicated, Chair Belzer, if the commission would like for the company to come back at a separate period of time to discuss the contents of the report, it is willing to do that. And then my final point that I wanted to make sure was clear was we appreciated the questions today about resource adequacy, particularly as we think towards future resource planning. And the company notes that it will be here, I believe, September 15th for an allowable ex parte to talk through resource planning. And so we, again, we appreciate and look forward to that conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. Commissioners, are there any questions for Duke at this time? This certainly does not preclude asking Duke to come in at a later time and provide explanation or information as well. Commissioner Justin Williams?
Just want to, I don't know when, but definitely would appreciate the opportunity at a later time to come in and have a further discussion. I enjoyed the discourse this morning, so I don't know what that looks like, but definitely would like to reserve that as an opportunity to continue this discussion.
Okay, thank you. I think we all will at some point, but I know I'm still digesting a lot of what's in the report. I don't know where the other commissioners may stand on that, but I think we will probably take Duke up on that offer at some point. So,
Understood, Chair Belzer. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other commissioners? Again, I'd like to thank the Office of Regulatory Staff for making this presentation today. I think it does provide some nice context as we continue to go through the report, and appreciate Duke being here with so many people in case there were questions. We do appreciate that. And if there's nothing further from the commission, we will conclude this presentation and thank everyone for their participation. Thank you. We are adjourned.